tonight we're going to be talking about our political analysis, how to get a Green New Deal and come out of the coronavirus crisis with a path to a more equitable and stable economy and environment. In times of crisis, what is politically possible changes? Like right now, we have an unprecedented opportunity to make the ideas that we have lying around, like a $15 minimum wage and trillion-dollar investments in energy infrastructure, into reality. But our opposition knows this too, and they'll be fighting to use this crisis as a chance to roll back regulations, spread racism and fear, and to consolidate money and power for the 1%. By unifying our message around the country, we can improve our odds in this ideological battle for the common sense policies of our nation. Let's see if my space, okay. So let's see, here we are.
So hey everyone, thanks for joining us. So we're going to be talking about political alignment. So what is a political alignment? It's a social and political force that aligns around a shared agenda and vision for society and government and dictates what governments should do. If a political alignment wins public support and political power, it becomes the dominant alignment, which defines the common sense of society, sets the terms of political debate, and directs social and economic policy. To stop the climate crisis requires massive government action. Change at this level requires a shift in the dominant political alignment. And our elected officials will support the ideas that the public considers common sense. Public support for a Green New Deal is so high that every major presidential candidate in the Democratic primary, from Bernie to Biden, support it. So we're really seeing a shift in alignments. So we're going to be talking about two dominant alignments today that really define the past 80 years of US politics. The first one being the New Deal, which was 1932 to about mid-70s, and the Reagan Alignment, which is 1980s until right now, unfortunately. So here's a little bit of background about the New Deal alignment. So it was post-Great Depression. FDR instituted the Second Bill of Rights, which states all of these things, that we have a right to a job, an adequate wage, and decent living, a decent home, medical care, economic protection during sickness, accident, old age, or unemployment, and a good education. This was widely accepted among the public because of a coalition of labor unions, blue-collar workers, racial and religious minorities, Democratic State Party organization, white Southerners, farmers, all of these people in this coalition supported it, and the public also supported it. So what did the New Deal alignment accomplish? It accomplished middle-class support, minimum wage, Social Security, financial regulation, environmental regulation, imperfect and evolving inclusion and support of racial minorities. All of that seems really radical now, all things we're fighting for now, but it was widely understood that society was moving towards these goals, and not only that, but that it was the responsibility of the government to secure these rights for people. So even post-New Deal, Republicans like Nixon and Eisenhower passed sweeping environmental regulation and invested tons of money into public infrastructure because it was the dominant alignment. Things that would be politically unthinkable right now were possible, all because there was this understanding that the government should provide these services to people. So when looking at the Second Bill of Rights and knowing some of the groups, that coalition that I mentioned, that comprised the New Deal alignment, what were some of the values? I'm going to break us out into some groups and discuss some values that this alignment, the New Deal alignment, promoted. Welcome back. Does anyone want to share out some of the values that they talked about in their breakout rooms?
So we just talked about the fact that there were the promotion of equitable wages, of the idea that it's the government's responsibility to, hold up the ideals that are being put forth, and that everybody is should have access to the same standard of living. And in regards to the environment, that natural resources are worth protecting, need to be protected, and need legislation to do so. And I don't know, Katie, do you want to add more to that?
Sure. I also said equal access in a way, because I think by setting up Medicaid and Medicare and some of these other government programs, we're trying to promote equal access to resources. So at least in spirit, everyone can go see a doctor, everyone can obtain a certain level of healthcare, and that keeps people living at a certain standard of living that I guess we deem like acceptable, or at least puts us on a platform where everyone's really receiving the basic care and their basic needs taken care of through government programs.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't really talk about this, but I think a lot of the Green New Deal policies, or not Green New Deal, a lot of the New Deal policies focus on making sure that people support themselves independently as opposed to completely leaning on welfare of the state. So like the idea of Social Security is that it's kind of like insurance that you pay into. So there was still kind of this spirit of like free enterprise, which is very American and interesting that it worked its way into a lot of those policies. Yeah, those were all great. Thank you. Even 20 years after FDR, the New Deal alignment was dictating the political common sense at the time. So what happened? How did we get from there to where we are now? So there was, World War II, union busting, civil rights legislation, Watergate, a general loss of trust in the government, and Reagan's election in itself really led to this new dominant alignment.
Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yep.
Yes.
All righty. Yeah, so Reagan's election accomplished a lot of these things here that are on the list by destroying unions, cutting taxes, deregulating industry. Groups that supported the ideas and values in the Reagan alignment, they were able to combine their people power to win elections and gain political power. They were able to send Reagan to the White House, and he started making these ideas into concrete policy. And that's what happens when a diverse and powerful political alignment wins elections and is able to push from the inside and outside at once. Imagine that our progressive movements were able to take back the House, the Senate, and the presidency. We'd begin to see policies like Medicare for All and the Green New Deal be put into action and become the new dominant alignment. So what are some of the American values and ideals that the Reagan alignment rooted in? You can shout out an answer if you want to, or throw it in the chat if you think of something.
Survival.
Every man for himself.
Yep.
The rugged individualism.
Yeah, I would say independence and liberty.
Yeah.
Smaller government.
Oh, that's a good one. Yep.
The idea of social Darwinism or survival of the fittest.
Yep.
I think
Everyone can be a millionaire.
Yeah. I think he also said something like the 10 scariest words are, I am from the government and I am here to help you, which I think sums it up pretty well.
Yep. It's right here. Here are some of the groups and coalitions that supported the Reagan Alignment and ushered it into dominance. The climate crisis came at a really bad time because just as we were starting to understand the problem and the level of government action that's required to solve the problem, the Reagan Alignment was ushering in an ideology of rampant capitalism and privatization that drove the idea of big government intervention for the common good into the political wilderness. The Reagan Alignment and the logic of small government is deeply reliant on economic anxiety and racism, the false fear giving communities of color things they don't deserve. If you think about the stereotype of the welfare queen, that comes out of this era. We need to challenge racism in order to challenge the Reagan Alignment and make massive government action for the common good politically possible again. So where are we now? We are still in the Reagan Alignment. We haven't seen the massive government action that we need to stop the climate crisis or to bring about any large progressive change that we need. And it's led us to the moment that we're in right now. All right, but we do have some good news, believe it or not. The good news is that there's an emerging Peoples Alignment that believes in dignity. We're starting to see cracks in the Reagan Alignment, such as Christian groups breaking with Trump, and previously radical ideas such as Medicare for all becoming much more popular. Can anyone think of another crack in the Reagan Alignment? You can put your ideas into chat or yell something out if you think of something.
Trickle-down economics is not working so hot. We're still waiting for that to trickle down.
Right. We all know what trickles down, and it's not wealth.
The changing public opinion of socialism?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think people are becoming more aware of what it really is. Yeah.
An awareness that essential workers are not generally wearing white collars. They're in the service industry, or they're, healthcare. They're not sitting in offices, and we don't pay them nearly enough for what they do. And I think people are appreciating that.
Yeah, I definitely think people are becoming more aware of that right now and realizing that all these people that are essential were treated almost like expendable before, So.
I think also the Reagan administration did try and turn back a lot of environmental regulations, but like Nixon actually created the EPA and created a lot of those environmental laws that people like because they protect their air and their water. And I think now people are realizing that those are really important. Like they protect everybody, and actually a lot of people do support like environmental action or care for the environment. So I think people on both sides actually are rejecting some of that Reaganism in terms of like just letting people do what they want with the environment.
Yeah, especially now too, I think people are becoming more aware because as we're in quarantine and everything, there's so much of the air pollution is cleared up, which is wonderful. And I don't think anyone wants it to go back the way it was. So you have to keep pushing forward. But moments of crisis present a profound opportunity to change the common sense of our society and to usher in a new dominant alignment. So what has COVID-19 shown us? And I think we were just talking about some of that, but Reaganomics are the reason our economy is collapsing so quickly with the coronavirus. Instead of investing in people, the federal government was funding corporate interests in wars. Instead of strengthening worker protections, unions were destroyed. Corporations were valued over families. But we're now seeing values that were widely understood during the New Deal alignment starting to become popular again. Groups and institutions have been pushing for these values for a long time, but this crisis has the potential to push us into a new dominant alignment. Just 6 months ago, Medicare for All was seen as radical. Now it's more popular than it's ever been. So along with those positive values, we also have some Reagan values that are increasing. And we need to combat Trump's racist narrative and build a multiracial movement. We're seeing a spike in anti-Chinese and anti-Asian racist attacks. We're seeing undocumented immigrants were left out of the CARES Act, and because of environmental racism and practices like redlining, communities that are home to fossil fuel infrastructure like coal plants are disproportionately made up of low-income communities and communities of color. Those communities are now experiencing greater numbers of coronavirus deaths. We need to actively combat this.
So what do we need now? First, we need to decide what kind of movement we're building. Some people who are progressive and deeply concerned with racism feel that stopping emissions by any means necessary is the most important, most progressive thing that we can do. And don't get me wrong, we definitely think that stopping emissions is necessary work that needs to be done. But we think that only doing that or putting climate first at all cost will lead to a movement of panicked white people without a progressive analysis that will fail to build a broader multiracial left that we truly need, and it'll lead to false solutions that deepen injustices and deepen inequities. We need to build a broad, popular, intersectional movement to win on racial justice, to win on Indigenous rights, to win on economic justice, and to win on climate. So if we need massive government intervention on climate and other really important issues, we need a different kind of movement to get there. The question is, how do we do this? Where we are now on the left is issue movements are gaining ground in public opinion and in policy, most significantly the movement for Indigenous rights, for Black Lives Matter, the immigrants' rights movement, the climate movement, and so many more, as you can see here. And as these movements grow over the next 10 to 15 years, we envision these movements claiming space and building popularity for these issues, but at the same time, they begin to angle their work towards a movement of movements that will generate cross-movement vehicles in both electoral and broad social and political spaces. So the question we're asking ourselves is, how can the climate movement play its best role within this movement ecosystem and formation? So the Green New Deal, that's what we've been talking about for a long time. So what is the Green New Deal? In its practical form, the Green New Deal is a resolution that calls for Congress calling on Congress for job creation, economic and social justice. Here are some of the highlights of those things: federal jobs guarantee, decarbonization of the economy, a just transition. But the Green New Deal is a roadmap and a vision for what our society should look like and the role that government should take. The Green New Deal is a vision for grand social and economic shift to tackle climate, racial, migrant, and economic justice. The Green New Deal is really an opportunity to stop saying no to all this bad and fight for a future that we really all need. So, it really reached popularity in 2018. There was the Nancy Pelosi sit-in with AOC and Sunrise Movement. And just some background, there are 95 House co-sponsors and 14 Senate co-sponsors for the Green New Deal. And really the Green New Deal is a vision. It's a vision for grand social and economic shift to tackle all of these things. And we're using the lens of the climate crisis to usher in broad systemic change. So while our movement has really been coalescing around the Green New Deal for a number of years, then this, awful pandemic happened. So our vehicle for this alignment shift is happening and maybe more successful through this different lens, through the People's Bailout. Just a show of hands, who's heard of the People's Bailout? Cool. So the Green New Deal and the People's Bailout are happening side by side, and they have a very similar vision. So I'm just going to go over the top 5 demands of the People's Bailout. So number 1, health is a top priority for all people, no exceptions. Number 2, to provide economic relief directly to the people. Number 3, to rescue workers and communities, not corporate executives. Number 4, to make a down payment on a regenerative economy while preventing future crisis. And number 5, protect our democratic process while protecting each other. So you can find more information at thepeoplesbailout.org. You can see that over 1,000 organizations representing millions of people in our country have already signed on in support. So addressing climate change and environmental injustice will not diffuse efforts to address the coronavirus and its economic fallout if we apply intersectional policies such as the Green New Deal. They are designed to address connected issues in a way that protects the most vulnerable people while building a more just and sustainable economy.
So circling back to the 4th demand, making a down payment on a regenerative economy while preventing future crisis. That's how the climate crisis shows up in the People's Bailout, and the key parts of it are listed here. Policymakers in the Trump administration are trying to return the economy back to a status quo where safety and security are promised only to corporations in the top 1%. However, we can boost our economy and employ millions of people by building the renewable energy infrastructure that we need to stop the climate crisis. Emma, did we want to break out into groups again here?
Oh, sure. So I just wanted to break out into groups for a moment and talk about these 2 vehicles for change and talk about ways in which we see in our communities COVID changing the dominant alignment to make either one of these vehicles more possible. Anyone want to share out what y'all talked about in your breakout rooms?
Well, we were talking a lot about how people are living a lot more simply now, and families are doing things together. I feel like there's an echo. Are you guys getting an echo when I'm talking?
I just muted a few people.
Okay. And that, without all the driving, the air pollution's going down, and that people are starting to notice that, rampant, crony capitalism is really, damaging us, and how, it was just like making our communities less stable. So, it's giving people reason to think about how we can move forward. That's basically what we were talking about. Anybody else?
Sure, I'll mention. So, with like 24 million plus people losing their jobs, I was talking about how it's really foolish to tie healthcare to employment. And this really hit home for me when you're seeing all these millions of people unemployed, and now they lose their healthcare with that. And I guess it's never made tons of sense to me, but now it really seems to not be making sense to anybody, because now all those people don't have healthcare, but also we're in the midst of a pandemic, which is when you need your healthcare. So I think it's just really exposing the ironies, and I think that's why people are really rallying around the idea of Medicare for all, or at least a good public option, because people are living it. So yeah, I think that's one thing I've noticed.
Yeah, go for it, Pat.
Yeah, so I didn't get a chance to say this because it was a quick breakout, but the interesting thing that I learned was that 2/3 of our economy is consumer demand. That means that consumers have a lot of power. And it's something that we need to think about, how are we going to use that power? How are we going to demand? It's not like 80 or 90% of the economy is actually controlled by the 1% or less. They reap all the benefits, 80 or 90% of the benefits, but actually they depend on our dollars being spent to keep them going. So, how can we use that?
Mm-hmm.
That's good, because that also means that our economy depends on a lot of people having a disposable income. And we're seeing less and less of that as income inequality is getting worse and worse.
Definitely. I think two things that I've noticed are one being, student loan forgiveness, especially for nurses, is becoming a lot more popular. And, we're about to see some pretty massive strikes tomorrow, which I'm really excited to see how big those are, because I think it's going to be pretty unprecedented, and that we just have, built up Amazon as this thing we can't live without at the expense of workers that we don't see. And that's really changing right now.
Emma, can you tell us more about the strikes tomorrow? Because I haven't actually heard about that.
Oh yeah, I can, let me see if I can find a link, but it is being coined May Day, in which Amazon, Instacart, who has some other, a number of places are going on strike.
Target and Whole
Target.
Foods, I believe.
And
Healthcare
workers going on strike too?
I just wanted to know if it was nationwide.
I'm sorry, I talked over someone. Are healthcare workers going on strike too? And then whoever that was, please speak up again.
I see some stuff going in the chat.
Yeah.
If it's nationwide, yes. And then there's a couple of links that somebody dropped in there for this.
To my knowledge,
dropped in.
To my knowledge, it's just those organizations. It's not healthcare workers.
The first link wasn't the right one. It's the second one, the article.
Thank you for dropping that in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just posted it on Facebook like yesterday, so I had it ready.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that tomorrow. Okay, I'm going to go back into the screen share unless anybody has anything else that they wanted to share. No? All right, going back in. Can everybody see my screen? I'm assuming you can. All right, so right now we're dealing with a crisis that's killing tens of thousands of people while at the same time suffering the detrimental effects of the climate crisis. As long as the Reagan Alignment is still dominant, we cannot win the massive government action that is required to stop either one of these crises. We need a movement of movements to bring us the kind of change that values all people. The Green New Deal and the People's Bailout are two vehicles reacting to different crises, but the results and the visions are the same path to a very similar future that we want to see. Our work is creating a new political alignment. So we're getting to the end here. If you have enjoyed this training, we encourage you to support 350NH with whatever you can. We aren't funded by any national organization, and we're going to rely on our community of supporters to stay open and keep our organizers employed throughout these uncertain economic times. Right now, if you sign up to be a monthly sustaining donor, we will match the first month's gift to Mutual Aid Defense New Hampshire. They're a local organization working to provide aid to people in need of food, housing, and other supplies across our state of New Hampshire. So, and if you look over into the chat, you'll see that Emma's dropped some links in there. So please join us in urging our senators to oppose stimulus packages that include bailouts for fossil fuel companies. We'd like to thank Beyond the Choir, 350.org, Sunrise, and Naomi Klein for the creation of some of the content that we used in this webinar. And thank you all for joining us tonight. Please feel free to reach out to Emma or myself if you have any questions or would like to connect. So I am going to end our presentation now, but I hope that everyone has a great evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. It was
Thank
great
you.
to see you. Have a good
It's
night.
nice seeing all of
Thank
you.
you, Jen.
Thank you so much.